My grandfather really believed that peace is the best defense from one side, but he was the defender of this country until even while he was kidnapped, because the location where he found Kibbutz Nir Oz was defending the country when the IDF never came. And he is the biggest believer on the IDF. I'm sure his heart is completely broken, because even on his last call, on 8 a.m. in the morning, he told his sister, there are a lot of missiles here, and they are speaking Arabic outside. It's not like unusual, but you have nothing to worry about. 10, 15 minutes, the IDF is coming and it's done. He was worried. He said, might come a time when thousands of Palestinians will stand on the fence and try to cross it. And when that will happen, the Air Force will have to shoot all of them. And that will be very bad for the image of Israel.
My guest today is Daniel Lifshitz. His grandparents, Yocheved and Oded Lifshitz, were brutally kidnapped by Hamas from their home in Kibbutz Nir Oz on October 7th, along with many others from their community. They were taken to Gaza. His 86-year-old grandmother, Yocheved, was actually released in late October as part of a deal between the U.S. and Qatar. Daniel, I want to thank you very much for making the effort to come all the way here to Jerusalem to speak with us today. It seems a bit ridiculous to ask you, how are you and how are you doing and how are you feeling today? I can only imagine the emotional roller coaster that the past year has been like for you.
You know, having the option not to know what will be with your beloved ones, it's really impossible. I don't imagine, I don't wish to anyone, even my worst enemies, to have family as a hostage, to be a family member of a hostage, because you don't know what will happen.
Has your grandmother given you more details about her time in captivity?
The way there was extremely difficult, she said. She was on the bike. She didn't know if she will make it from the kibbutz to Gaza. It was just a mile in front, and the road was bumpy.
And so she's on a motorbike.
So she was on a motorbike, but comparing to other hostages, she was on her stomach. They rolled her like in a carpet. They put her on her stomach, so hands one side, the legs the other side, and so you imagine like all her body. It's not like she was not even sitting.
This is an 86-year-old woman.
And when she entered Gaza, the civilians were the ones who were beating her there. Then the terrorists were the one that pushing away because she became a card and an asset. She said that the way in the tunnels was horrible because she had a very bad fracture in the leg because she broke her leg 28 years ago in the Rockies mountain. She can't really walk barefoot for 200 meters, and she walked there 5-6 hours. Wow. So she said it was muddy, it was narrow, it became more and more humid. It was a very hot day. 5-6 hours of walk. In the meantime, they had to sit. Adina Moshe told her, like, Yochke, just sit, shvi. And the terrorists were shouting on them, but she said, just sit, what they can do. They already killed our husbands, because my grandmother was sure that my grandfather was murdered. Because when she looked back on the last look, she saw him on the ground, unconscious and bleeding. And he had blood pressure issues, but she didn't imagine that he fainted. She thought he was murdered. They walked 5-6 hours. She remembered that they went about 40 meters deep because she counted the steps. And when they came down, she said they had everything prepared. So they had like oxygen machines to fix the oxygen, to measure it. And they had the rooms were with the ceramic on the ground and the side, but it was so humid that it was all wet. So it was slippery. They had running water down there. Food was on the minimum. Even then, when they supposed to have more food, they didn't have much. They ate like a pita bread with a bit of cheese on it, za'atar and cucumber, and sometimes give coffee in the morning. But you understand, when you get a diarrhea, you have it's the end. You can't reverse that. I don't think Hamas thought they will move the hostages from those areas where in the tunnels. From the apartment is something else, but from the tunnels, there were areas prepared for the hostages. In the moment they start to walk the hostages, that is a death walks, like being in the Holocaust, because we saw where the hostages are now. So the conditions she had, which were very, very bad conditions to stay for a long time, but it's a survival conditions which they can survive. When they start to walk them from there, they are in places like such a narrow tunnels, low, narrow, no place to pee, no place to shit, no place to nothing. So the situation now is, even if there are no attacks, and even if they don't execute them, now they just might die from the conditions in the tunnels. And after the rescue of Noor Gamani and the other three, so of course they put so many hostages down back to the tunnels.
Your grandmother says that she met Hamas chief Yahya Sinwar during her time in captivity in Gaza, and she was not afraid to tell him what she thought.
Yeah, she was not afraid to tell him what she thought, although all the other hostages tell her, hey, be quiet, don't do that. It can harm us. He said, what can harm us anymore? I mean, we are here. And she told him, like, how dare you? I mean, what he did for her was ending the option for the coexistence with the Palestinians ruling by Hamas, or with the Palestinians on that time. I mean, for her it was a heartbreak, because all her life she fought and tried to open the eyes for the people, for trying to have the coexistence, by on the same time warning about Hamas. I believe that in the last 11 months, the only one who met almost Yahya Sinwar and Prime Minister Netanyahu is my grandmother. So I really advise my grandmother to be the negotiator instead of the lousy table of mediators that we have now.
Tell me a little bit about what it was like, what Kibbutz Nir Oz means for you, and what it was like growing up there before October 7th.
So Kibbutz Nir Oz means to me home. It's my home. I was born in Sweden actually, but my parents moved to Nir Oz when I was a baby. It's amazing to grow up in a kibbutz. It's very free. It's a heaven. In Nir Oz is very special because it's a very old school kibbutz. So I grew up in a communal sleeping. Like there were almost none of the kibbutzes which continue communal sleeping after the Gulf War, but Nir Oz continued. So it was until 1995.
And just for our listeners, who most of whom are abroad, who might not know this practice, in these kibbutzim, where basically kids get to all sleep together. They're sent into these communal I guess you could call it, it's almost like a kindergarten, but it's full care, full day care, and full night care. And so actually, before we went on air, you were telling me that Albel Yaud, the girl with the beautiful smile, the picture that you're wearing on your T-shirt, she was also part of that. Growing up with you. I grew up with her brother. He's in my age, Dolev Yahud, who was murdered on October 7. And that's why all those are really like family for me. Now I'm here with Arbel, but I can come with Sagid Ekelchen shirt, because Sagid Ekelchen, he was with me in communal sleeping, is in my age. And moreover, only from the hostages I knew about 94. From the first 240 hostages. 94. I didn't even start to count how many I know that's been murdered. Because even in the Nova, I had one of my friends, Leo Rasulin, who I played football with him in Apol Be'er Sheva, that was murdered in Nova. So, I mean, I'm very concentrated on doing everything to release the hostages and bringing them back home before I can start to grave on everyone and make my closure over so many that I've lost. I'm very fortunate that my mom and my daughter, which for my daughter, the kibbutz is her second home in the last decade. She was there maybe 20% of the time. She's 12 years old. She's the only great-granddaughter to a hostage in the world. My grandfather is the only great-grandfather held hostage in the world. And on October 6th, they left Kibbutz Nir Oz on 7 p.m.
They left to babysit the son of my ex-wife boyfriend. Kibbutz, kind of thing. And on 5 p.m. they still played in the pool together with Oad and Karen Munder that's been kidnapped on October 7th. So I was very, very lucky for my mom and my daughter. My grandparents did the opposite way, because my grandfather and my grandmother, they were to my uncle, but they didn't feel well. So my grandfather didn't feel well. They called an ambulance. He had a blood pressure issue, so he fainted. And then they brought an ambulance. And
this was on October 6th.
On October 6th, he was close to Netanya, and he never wants to go because he doesn't want to lose his license. So he doesn't want to go to the hospital. So they took care of him there, and he signed for them that he doesn't want to go to the emergency room. And my father took them to the kibbutz. So they basically arrived to the kibbutz few hours before. But, if you will ask them, what would you prefer between the two? Of course, when they were kidnapped, I think they were at least quiet that none of the other family members were there, because a week before there were 15 family members in Kibbutz Nir Oz. Imagine, I could, I don't know if I could, but probably I couldn't sit with you here while 15 members, including my mom and my daughter, would be either kidnapped, murdered, or suffer these 7 hours of Holocaust in Kibbutz Nir Oz, holding the handle of the bomb shelter while terrorists are flaming the houses or trying to get in. And
you mentioned some of the things that happened that day, the atrocities. Have you been able to go back to your grandparents' home in Nir Oz? And when you do, what does that feel like?
So I've been there many times, probably more than 10 times. It feels like all my childhood is burned. There's nothing. This house my grandparents were like parents for me, because my parents were pretty young when I was born, and it was a kibbutz vibes. So I was going all the time to my grandparents. Every Saturday morning, I was to my grandparents. My grandfather would make me breakfast with my grandmother, playing, going all around. And when I go enter there, I see all the history. And I knew how this house was very small. Then they added another part of it, and then the bomb shelter, and everything was burned for my grandfather. I remember my grandfather every night he was reading the newspaper every day.
He was a journalist.
He was a journalist for many years. He was about the justice and doing the right thing. My grandfather, he was one of the first journalists to interview Yasser Arafat.
Your grandparents are one of the founders of Kibbutz Nir Oz. They were also peace activists, like you mentioned, who fought for coexistence their whole lives through humanitarian work, including transporting sick Gazans to Israeli hospitals. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I want to start, first of all, that my grandfather really, for him, the worst thing in the Middle East was Hamas. He was writing so much about it and really saying that Hamas ruling Gaza is our worst enemy, and we will never have security while it continues like that. The first thing he did, that was very different from the way the country worked and Gaza worked on that time, all the governments, was education. He came in 1984 to Gaza to speak with Rashad Ashawa, the leader at that time, to try and convince to change the education, to be very focused on education. So for 20 years, he said, Oslo agreement is one thing, and having a relationship with Yasser Arafat or trying to do coexistence, everything is fine.
But if there's not an education of the other people on the other side, are people that we need to coexist with and not, unfortunately, like we've discovered many of the textbooks in these UNRWA schools, quite the opposite, actually encouraging children, very young children, to hate.
Very simple. No education, no future. That's what he said every time. And when Hamas took the leadership in 2007, he couldn't go there anymore. So he tried to warn against Hamas. And he tried to speak how we don't have security. And while doing that, he was taking sick children, Gazans, to the hospital in Israel to take chemotherapy treatment and back. And before that, going to 1972, he was standing and trying to fight for the right of the Bedouins in Rafah. He was standing in front of the IDF and Ariel Sharon there that they will not seal the wells of the Bedouins so their ships will have water. And from the other side, in 1973, he was the first to cross Suez Tunnel together with Ariel Sharon. So he fought 4 wars. He founded the kibbutz in 1957. He believed in that peace is the best defense from one side. But he was the defender of this country until even while he was kidnapped, because the location where he found Kibbutz Nir Oz was defending the country when the IDF never came. And he is the biggest believer on the IDF. I'm sure his heart is completely broken, because even on his last call, on 8 a.m. in the morning, he told his sister, Talma, there are a lot of missiles here, and they are speaking Arabic outside. It's not like unusual, but you have nothing to worry about. 10, 15 minutes, the IDF is coming, and it's done. He was worried. He said, might come a time when thousands of Palestinians will stand on the fence and try to cross it. And when that will happen, the Air Force will have to shoot all of them. And that will be very bad for the image of Israel.
He already saw it coming.
But the aircraft never came. And the IDF never came to Nir Oz. And he's there. Warning from Hamas. Speaking about education, defending the country, fight for peace, and fight for human rights. And that is end. So I hope that at least something will come from what happened on October 7.
I want to talk about your grandmother, who's now been out of captivity for a year. How is she doing, and how is she dealing with the situation?
She's unbelievable. It's unbelievable how an 86-year-old woman survived like that. And she's so strong, and she's so fragile on the same time, and she's healthy and sick on the same time. But physically, she completely recovered, and I know that because her problems came back, which is one thing that I hold on to, is that when she came back, even if it was 17 days, but she had a diarrhea that she lost 10 kilograms in 17 days, which means she was really days from dying there. But when she came back, she had no physical problems, the historical ones. She was sleeping with oxygen. Suddenly she doesn't sleep with oxygen. Her hands were shaky. Suddenly they are steady. So her pain's gone. So I saw on her, which is a very sick woman, how she survived and how the body is going into a survival mode.
Does that give you hope for your grandfather?
It's giving me hope for my grandfather. It gives me hope for the other hostages. But when I see that the last 6 hostages being executed were on starvation situation, which were about under 40 kilograms, the body cannot survive for much more. That's why the urgency became a time which even body on survival mode might not be able to survive anymore, because they are not in the forest trying to find something to eat. If they don't get it, they have nothing to eat. And from all the stories of Aviva Segal, which I heard her story many times, I mean, they were really abusing them, and they were under starvation. My grandma survived. It's amazing, because in the end, it's a mental survive as well. When she was kidnapped, in that moment, she took a decision. Her decision was, I'm starting to write a diary in my mind. And she said, if I won't survive, I won't survive. But if I will survive, I will be able to come back and speak about everything happened and give so much information that will help the country and will help another families. When she goes up and speaking, she speaks her diary. She wrote a diary in her mind. when the Shin Bet interrogated her in the hospital for 3 hours just when she came back, they said there was no hostage in the history who gave so much information. We knew nothing about what's going on down there in the tunnels, and suddenly we knows everything. She's so strong, and she was way before this country became a strong country. So for her, it's more important to help this country to build like she always did, and more than how the country will defend herself.
Daniel Lifshitz, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us. And I hope that you'll be reunited with your grandfather very soon. And I want to offer my condolences for everyone that you've lost and wish you lots of luck for going forward. And I hope that the future and the next day when we speak of the day after the war, that you can imagine a time where you're able to heal from all these wounds. Thank you very much.